Welcome to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast, your weekly news roundup of hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories from around the Gem State. Hosted by Fish and Game's Public Information Specialist, Connor J. Lease.
I was telling them about this. There's that water plant. They were boxing water out of there, out of that facility there, that modern facility. They were boxing water, and their market was Manhattan.
Jesus.
It's crazy. Idaho is no longer a secret.
No.
Especially in Manhattan.
No. Yeah. Somehow these podcasts always end up, we start talking about East Coast, and I'm sure we've offended people that shop at Whole Foods, and
Manhattanites love their Kokanee sulfur water.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Speaking of drinking Kokanee water, do you guys have any superstitions when you're out fishing? Doesn't have to be for Kokanee, but
I do a lot of steelhead fishing, and
you wear the same pair of underwear?
Nope, I have. So my biggest superstition is I have a net, like just the hoop itself, that I landed my first steelhead in, right? And that net is in in my fishing vest. I have a piece of that net that's probably 4 inches by 4 inches that goes with me every time I go fishing.
That's cool.
Specifically for steelhead. Nothing else, but for whatever reason, I cannot get rid of that stupid net.
Is it the same little scrap of net that you take with you everywhere, or is it you cut them up into little...
It's that same piece because it's slowly degraded through time to where there's only that piece left. I had the entire hoop.
It sounds like one of those pictures, like the picture just continues to fade over time, like
that's
Back
my
to
worry.
the Future. By the time it's gone, you will not be catching fish anymore.
I may never catch another steelhead.
Oh. What about you, Tucker?
I can't think of any superstitions I have, but I will say I've dispelled one. I spend a lot of time on boats, and I've shared boats with a bunch of people who've said you should never bring a banana on a boat. It's bad
heard that
luck.
one before.
Really?
Yeah. So because, I'm just difficult to be around, I decided to test that for a full summer when I was working for Fish and Game as a temporary employee. This is, 10 years ago. So I ate a banana every single time we went on a boat.
Did you cramp?
No. Funny thing is...
The Kokanee population just crashed.
Yeah, this is in 2020. No. No. The one day, I did forget to bring a banana one day, and that day our engine did blow up on the boat, and we had to row back about a mile from shore. So I'm a firm believer that the banana thing is bull.
Yeah, it's almost like you need the banana.
Yeah.
There are some people that the banana is such a big deal, they will not let you on a boat.
Yeah, I don't fish with those people.
Could it be a fake banana that you just...
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. It feels like another podcast, Connor, is fishing and hunting superstitions.
There you go.
That'd be brilliant.
Yeah.
Would you keep it like in your tackle box?
No, just a lunch box.
Okay.
Usually eat it.
Just out
Eat
for
it
everybody
lunch
to
while
see.
we're out on the water.
Yep.
Yeah, not hiding it.
I think
making everybody uncomfortable.
I think it's a little bit different when you're using electrofishing gear and nets and trap nets versus when you're actually fishing.
That's fair. Yeah.
When you were eating it, did you make eye contact with those on the boat?
No, that's weird. That's taking it too far.
Well, should we kick things off here?
I thought we already did.
I know, but officially. But yeah, this is our first kind of on-site podcast. This is pretty cool.
Off the grid.
Off the grid.
I don't know if we can use
using
that.
power.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're here in beautiful Featherville, Idaho. Is Featherville technically Region 3 or 4?
It's 4.
It's 4.
Okay.
Yep.
And we're here at one of our enforcement cabins. And we got handcuffs, we got fly swatters, 20-year-old mop. But yeah, we're joined here by Mike Peterson, Region 4's Regional Fisheries Manager, and Tucker Brauer, regional fisheries biologist, and Ben Bieri as well.
Not a biologist.
No.
Not a manager.
Plays one on TV.
Not even that.
Yeah. And it's been pretty cool. We saw some wildlife on the way up. There was some elk outside up on the hillside right before we started.
Yep. Some grouse along the road on the way in.
Yep. If you hear our teeth chattering, it's because the cabin was about 33 degrees when we walked inside this morning. So it's slowly starting to warm up.
Yeah.
But welcome guys. Thanks for joining us here on the first Off the Grid podcast.
I don't know.
No, it doesn't have the same. We're clearly plugged in.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a heater for Christ's sakes. Come on.
So off the grid-ish.
Yeah. But no, the reason we're up here is because it's close proximity to Anderson Ranch Reservoir, or ARRs. I learned yesterday.
Yeah, we do need to prepare our audience for potential acronym soup.
Yeah, going to be a lot. So pull out a piece
Yeah,
of
when we have
paper.
conversations with the fisheries, it's acronym central.
Yeah.
We do like our acronyms.
Yeah.
So you'll just have to chime in when we use one.
Yes.
Believe me, I will be asking those questions. But yeah, we're here. We're going to be talking about kokanee today, and we got two of the best guys in the region who know their thing about it. And so welcome you guys.
And thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Why is Anderson Ranch notorious? Like, why is it synonymous with kokanee?
It's just got a great history of producing a phenomenal fishery. This is one of the few fisheries in the state that for the longest time has been naturally reproducing. It's just a beautiful area and an awesome fishery.
And people come from all over the country to fish here, not even just the state, but it has that
it's
reputation.
A destination.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that go into kokanee management, and I'm sure we're going to touch on a lot of those today. But since 2017, we've kind of been on a roller coaster with the fishery that's been produced. But in 2017, it was world-class kokanee fishing. Most of the fish were between 16 and 18 inches in length, and there were folks catching 25 fish limits per person. 3 or 4 people on a boat, 75 to 100 fish in a cooler, and that's why people are very interested in Anderson Ranch.
Yeah.
Is 16 to 18 inches a pretty big kokanee, or is that what's like the max for a kokanee? What's like a trophy kokanee?
That's a big kokanee by anyone's standards. Sometimes we see them upwards of 20 up to 22 inches. I think the biggest one I've seen out of Anderson is 22.
Wow.
So they do get bigger, but 16 to 18 is about that sweet spot of size that a lot of anglers are after.
Yeah.
And what age are they at that point?
Here, usually those fish are about 3 years old when they hit that size.
Yeah, some of those, 3-4 years, depending on their growth rate throughout their life. But for the most part, those fish are 3 years old, and they're growing super fast compared to other kokanee populations like Dorshak. You just don't typically see that size of fish in some of those colder water systems. Lake Pend Oreille is similar.
Okay. What's the makeup of Anderson Ranch? Like, is it a deep reservoir? Is it long and shallow?
What makes it a pristine environment?
It's basically a bathtub, really steep. Down by the dam, it gets upwards of 300 feet deep. Just a ton of pelagic habitat, open water habitat. That's what kokanee key in on, and it's pretty much perfect conditions for growing kokanee.
Okay.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would say that we also it's lower elevation, like lower in latitude, longitude, latitude.
Be latitude.
Latitude between north and south, and because of that, it probably warms up a little sooner than some of those northern lakes, and so the growing season's probably a little bit longer. Very productive, zooplankton growth because it does fire up earlier, and kokanee definitely have preferred food source, and I think Anderson checks all those boxes for kokanee.
Okay.
Is right now the season, or is it April, 1st of April through July? What's
we get some hardcore anglers that are out in the earliest part of the season in March, but the bulk of the fishery really kicks on probably June through July into August a little bit. By the end of August, usually those bigger fish are moving out of the system to spawn into the tributaries. But yeah, we're a little early for the real hot fishing, but people do catch fish like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
This early in the season.
Yeah. We've had people at headquarters say they've come up and had success, limited, but they're catching fish.
It depends. It's hit or miss, right? So you get into a pot of fish and you can catch a limit fairly quickly if you stay on top of them. And, we, from a management standpoint, we can kind of tell what that fishery is going to look like over the course of the season based on the size of fish that are being caught right now. And, right now those fish are, 11 to 13 inches, which likely means that there's a lot of fish in the system to be caught.
Do you put out like a seasonal projection? Do we?
Yeah, we
like
try to.
Yeah, like a Kokanee outlook for this season.
Yeah, we try to. It's been kind of on my to-do list every spring to try and give a.
Well, you're on the spot now.
Right, for sure. But yeah, we try to put out like some kind of press release or just get the word out what the fishery is kind of shaping up to be. Usually we base that off of the previous year's fishery and then our netting that we do in the fall to kind of forecast the fish that are going to be entering the fishery the next year. But yeah, based on that information that we collected last year, it's shaping up to be a really good fishery this year. Should be a lot of fish, pretty good size structure, and yeah.
Yeah, and those fish, like we said, they're between 11 to 13 inches now. By the end of the season, by probably mid-July, those bigger fish are going to be pushing 15, 16 inches, and the 11-inch fish are going to be, that 13 to 14-inch range, which is just about, when we talk to anglers, that's what they're looking for.
Yeah. Some fun fishing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of start off and jump into an overview of what kokanee are. I'm guessing that the majority of anglers in Idaho probably know of kokanee, whether they fish them or not. But for those that don't, I mean, like, what makes kokanee special? What is kind of their history, their life cycle, their history in Idaho, and what makes them unique to some of our fisheries around here?
And we'll set the microphones down and just let you guys talk.
Yeah, we'll be back in 45 minutes.
Yeah, so what a kokanee is, it's just a landlocked sockeye salmon. Same species, just one returns to the ocean, one doesn't. So they replicate that lifestyle or that life cycle, basically using lakes as their ocean, traveling into tributary streams to spawn. And what makes them so popular is, in reality, they're flesh. I mean, they're awesome table fare. They're delicious and
great on crackers.
Smoked kokanee's the best. So obviously, anglers that are looking to put some meat away and eat some fish are really keen on kokanee. And we do have some native kokanee populations in Idaho, certain watersheds, but based on the popularity of the fish, we've worked to establish fisheries throughout the state. I don't know what the exact count of kokanee fisheries we have, but pretty prolific in the state right now.
You said earlier, Anderson is natural, parts of it.
They're not native.
Not native here.
Yeah, native.
But they're naturally reproducing
Okay.
that population. Like, when you go down the system, Lucky Peak and Arrow Rock are heavily dependent on hatchery stocking.
Okay.
And entrainment or movement from Anderson Ranch downstream through the water corridor into Arrow Rock and Lucky Peak as well.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What about, like, where did that split happen in Idaho between like sockeye and kokanee? Like, why were there some kokanee that were just unlucky and got walled off from heading out to the ocean?
So
they draw a short stick?
Well, so realizing that like Anderson Ranch and Arrow Rock and Lucky Peak are irrigation impoundments, they weren't here historically. There may have been sockeye that came up the Boise system and into some headwater lake historically. off the top of my head, I can't even think of a lake that would be suitable. But like in the Payette system, they certainly probably came into Payette Lake, up the Snake River, historically up the Payette, up the North Fork into Payette Lake. And so some of those populations that are still like available to anadromous waters, or historically were more anadromous drainages, like the Payette, like the salmon. There are kokanee native in Redfish Lake, Alturas, and Pettit, although we have stocked kokanee in those systems as well, and we still have Snake River sockeye that return to those systems. So mainly those anadromous waters would be the areas where they were probably native, where there was a headwater lake at the tops of those drainages.
Gotcha.
That's likely where we had sockeye or or non-anadromous kokanee. Like another example in the Oregon side of things would be like Wallowa Lake.
Okay.
Some of those, and I think that's up the Imnaha. So some of those areas that had those headwater systems, lakes where they could reside.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but so basically kokanee, all kokanee are sockeye, but that's where the split happened, was after impedance with the river systems.
Yeah, essentially they are Oncorhynchus nerca, which is the scientific name for sockeye. That's what kokanee are. A lot of our kokanee in Idaho are from a couple different sources. One of those sources is Lake Whatcom in Washington. That's where I believe all of our early kokanee kind of populations originated from. And so that's, I think, what originally started the Anderson Ranch kokanee in the system.
Are there greater size differences between sockeye and kokanee based on, obviously sockeye being anadromous and going out to the ocean? Are there pretty noticeable size differences, or are they all kind of the same?
So I spent a fair amount of time on the Snake River sockeye project, and the 24, 25-inch sockeye is a big sockeye returning to Idaho. Okay. In some of the coastal areas in Alaska, they get much larger than that. But we do, as Tucker mentioned, occasionally in low abundance years in Anderson Ranch, we might see kokanee 20 to 22 inches. So they're approaching, that size that we see from some of our sockeye returns. Okanagan Lake in Washington, most of those sockeye return anywhere from 18 to 22 inches. These Anderson Ranch kokanee are, in some years, are every bit as big as those fish. And so, when you talk about table fare, anglers wanting to put salmon away in the freezer, Anderson Ranch is a good place to potentially do that, depending on the year.
What's an old kokanee? How old do they get?
Curious. I was curious a little bit about that too, and just the general life cycle of the kokanee.
Yeah, so it kind of varies by the water body here in Anderson Ranch. Very, very rarely see any kokanee go past 3 years of age. Once they hit 3, they're in the river spawn and dying, and the next age class is filling in. Some of our populations in the state that are more hatchery supported, we have fish that live up past 5 years pretty frequently. So it just depends. But yeah, what was the second part of your question? Sorry.
Just the general life cycle. What that looks like. Walk us through hatchery. I guess we could start at a hatchery and into a body of water, and then
I would start in the gravel. Anderson Ranch is dependent on natural production. Yeah.
So with Anderson Ranch, these fish are, though we do stock it occasionally with hatchery fish, it's mostly wild reproduction that keeps the fishery going. So those fish, like I mentioned, once those 3-year-olds reach that point, they're going up primarily into the South Fork, upper South Fork, the Boise River. They do their thing. They spawn, lay their eggs in the gravel, and that's usually early September through the fall is when they're making that migration. So those eggs sit, incubate in the stream for a couple months. They hatch out, and usually they're coming out into the reservoir that following spring with that next year's runoff pushes those fish out. And then they're pelagic, they're open water out there eating zooplankton and growing for the next, again, couple years before they repeat that cycle.
So this year's class is moving down right now.
Yep, should be entering the reservoir here pretty much as we speak.
Yeah. We didn't see any of those as we were driving.
No.
They're pretty hard to see until they come back up the river.
They're pretty small.
Yeah.
So then they have 3 to 5 years in the reservoir.
Yep.
And then head back.
Yep.
Yeah, and typically we get this question all the time. When are the redfish going to be in the river? And up here for the South Fork of the Boise, we get reports anywhere from mid to late July. There's some fish that move way up high in the system, up by Big Smoky, Little Smoky area. But we also, the bulk of that kind of push out of the reservoir is typically around that last week of August, first week, Labor Day time frame each year. Okay. So.
We talked about a little bit about what they eat, and I think we'll get into that a little later too when we dive into Anderson Ranch. But what are some of the things that eat them?
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah, like kokanee, like they're popular with anglers. They're a salmon, so a lot of fats in their meat, and that's what makes them so delicious. And everything else is keying in on that too. Birds, other fish. We have, speaking of Anderson Ranch Reservoir, we have smallmouth bass in the reservoir. That love eating them as well. Pretty much anything that eats meat will eat a kokanee.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Poor guys.
Important food source for bull trout. There are still adfluvial, what we call adfluvial bull trout in the system. And those are bull trout that are spawned and reared in the streams. And then, similar to a kokanee, flush down into the reservoir and grow up in the reservoir. And then once they're reproductive age, they'll come back up and spawn, in those same tributaries that they were born in. And so that is an important food source for bull trout in the system as well. Northern pike minnow, there's a lot of things. You kind of touched on birds. We do see kind of an influx of white pelican that show up in late August because they can visually see those bright red fish in the lower end near where the South Fork of the Boise comes into Anderson Ranch. You'll see some pelicans kind of stack up out there, and that's when we know that the kokanee are running up the stream.
Got it.
As soon as they show up.
Nasty sons of bitches.
You're not a pelican fan.
No, I'm not.
Not even close.
No. Mike, you mentioned when you worked in Region 3, were you Fisheries Manager over in Region 3?
No. I guess I'll just kind of walk through my whole.
Please do.
I originally.
How's your life cycle?
Yeah. It's interesting and
Please don't talk about spawning.
Yeah.
No.
You can leave something.
Although there's some interesting pieces to that too. So.
Are you adfluvial?
No, I'd be fluvial. But so Tucker and I actually just did a presentation at the College of Southern Idaho for some aquaculture students, and we kind of went through this. And when I was 11 years old, somebody from Fish and Game came and talked, and I decided right then that I wanted to be a fish biologist when I was older. And so you kind of work your way through, you jump through all the hoops. I took the CSI program in Twin Falls, the aquaculture program, and then
You're native.
From Jerome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
born and raised in Jerome,
native.
and I'm back in Jerome as the regional manager. I went through CSI, transferred up to Moscow, worked at the Aquaculture Research Institute in Moscow for several years while I finished up my my bachelor's degree.
We'll beat that out.
Yeah.
His bastard's degree.
My bachelor's degree and my master's degree.
Yeah.
And then got a job with Fish and Game up at Lake Ponderay doing lake trout research. We brought in some commercial trap net fishermen from the Great Lakes and developed a population estimate on lake trout, and finished that work up in 2006 and got on full-time with Fish and Game at that time on the Snake River Sockeye project.
What's the biggest laker you ever pulled out of there?
It's funny. I caught probably around 42 inches, but the biggest one I've personally caught was in Stanley Lake up in Region 7.
Really?
Yeah, and it was 44 and a half inches.
Wow.
So all of the netting that we did in Ponderay, I never saw a fish as big as the one I've caught, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So
that's how you want it to be.
Yeah. Cool. Worked on the Snake River Sockeye project from 06 through about 15. We learned a lot during that time frame. We started the Springfield fish hatchery and sent millions of smolts out to the ocean, and that program's still ticking along. After 2015, I transferred to Region 3 as a regional fish biologist. Did a lot of lowland lake and reservoirs. I did a big panfish project at CJ Strike. Worked with sturgeon a fair amount, and then in 2019 I moved back to Jerome, and I've been in the regional manager position since about July of 2019.
Is that where your roots are? Jerome, Twin Falls area?
I was literally born in the hospital in Jerome, graduated high school there, moved away to do all this work in other places around the state, and now I'm back. And my family no longer lives there. My dad moved to Salmon. My mom's in Post Falls, Idaho. And so, people are spread out, but to me, it's still home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tucker Brauer, what about you, man?
Tucker's fully silver still.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike and I actually have kind of a similar background, like you mentioned. I was actually born and raised in Twin Falls, so just across the bridge from him. And sorry, Mike, I'll call you a North Sider, but
which is fine.
Yeah,
that's the best side.
We get along despite that. But born and raised in Twin Falls. How I kind of came into fisheries, I just got a random opportunity from a family friend who worked for Fish and Game one summer. He was actually the biologist, the same position I hold today. Kind of sought me out, said, hey, we're doing a creel survey up on Silver Creek, another fishery we manage here in the region, and we need somebody to interview anglers for summer. And he said, would you be interested? And I went, hell yes. Like, of course, I want to work for Fish and Game. And since then, I'd work summer jobs, bio-aid jobs, fishery technician jobs, all the way up through, about 2015. During that time, I went to CSI, went through the aquaculture program, same as Mike. Transferred up to University of Idaho, got my bachelor's and master's there. And then that's where, Mike and I's path kind of diverged. I ended up taking a fisheries biologist job in Santa Fe, New Mexico, working for New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. Spent about 3.5 years there as a native cutthroat trout biologist. Worked on a lot of restoration projects throughout the state there. And then, got tired of the Southwest and decided we need to come back to Idaho. My wife and I both applied. She also works for the department now. But we both got jobs in the Jerome office, just kind of out of blind luck. We ended up right where I grew up, in the same job that, the guy I worked for 10 years prior. So, I've been in this position as the North District Regional Biologist for exactly 3 years now. Just a couple weeks ago, hit my 3-year mark. So, it's pretty cool to come full circle and be back managing the fisheries that I enjoyed as a kid.
That's wonderful.
One of the things I always tell people too is folks like to, when we're on the phone, they like to say, "Oh, it's not as good as it used to be." And because we're both from the Magic Valley, we know what it used to be.
What are
and
they
they're talking about
specifically?
20. Well, just like, in general, like the fishing at Magic Reservoir isn't as good as it used to be, or the fishing at Anderson Ranch Reservoir isn't as good as it used to be.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, it's as good or better than it ever was.
Yeah.
In some cases,
And
not always.
And you can
Sometimes
attest
they're
to
right.
that.
Yeah, sometimes fishing has gone downhill. So
Yeah.
and there's
we'll
things
get,
to work
we'll get
on.
to that too, to the where things
Trials
went.
and tribulations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the management was let up a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. Did you guys, either of you, have like family or anything in the fish and wildlife management world that kind of that planted the seed early on?
I actually had an uncle that worked for Idaho Fish and Game for about 6 years out of Boise. His name's Vaughn Brauer. Hi, Vaughn, if you're listening.
Shout out, Vaughn.
Yeah, he worked in that, but no, he was not really an influence in me taking this career path. But yeah, some roots in the department and then kind of the field in general.
Yeah, and for me, my dad gave me some sage advice when I was young and said, make sure you're doing something that you'll enjoy. He was in the printing business and still is in the printing business today, and it's not something that I think he truly enjoyed his entire career.
Yeah.
And so I kind of took that to heart, and I enjoyed fishing, hunting and fishing with him. And so that's that. And then, like I said, you know, when I saw one of our old fisheries biologists come and give a talk, a retired biologist now, I decided that's what I wanted to do. And nobody in my family has went that direction.
Whenever we have these conversations, two things always stands out. University of Idaho. And then just how, and I don't use this word lightly, passionate our people are as a whole, the jobs they're doing.
Yep.
It's something that you find at 11 years old and you're like, that's what I want to do.
Yep.
We don't have a lot of people moving in and moving out from their jobs. We've got a lot of long tenured folks, and it's wonderful for many reasons.
Yeah.
But when we get to sit down and have these conversations, we can trust that the information that's you guys are divulging to us and to the listener is like, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. We know the trends.
Straight from the horse's mouth.
Straight from the Kokanee's mouth.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, and you know, I look at Tucker's career path versus my career path, and one of the things that I always think about is I've only lived in Idaho, right? Mm-hmm. I've only lived in Idaho. I've worked throughout the state in a lot of places, so I have that type of background. But then we also have people that have moved into the department from all across the United States. I get to work with those folks. You learn new ideas. You know, in my position currently, I've had the opportunity to meet people in other states that are managers and learn from them as well. And so it's kind of a small niche group of people that are very passionate.
Yeah.
Well, because there's only so many jobs out there across the nation where you can work in fish and wildlife management too.
Yep.
And it kind of condenses everybody down. And even in Tucker's case, like you might go to a different state if that job is available and come back.
Yep.
But
so we were talking about life cycle. And we had kind of hit on like what is world class. You talked a little bit about that, but what goes into what and you've mentioned it a couple of times. What are the Kokanee and Anderson eating that make this place so special?
For the most part, it's just the primary productivity, the zooplankton. The Kokanee are a filter feeder, so they just swim around, basically eating all the time. And Anderson Ranch Reservoir is a remarkably productive fishery. Like I say, it's got a lot of food out there, and they're just eating 24/7, basically.
When you drive up here, there's hot springs around. Does that matter at all? Is there like more minerals in the water? Is there like...
I don't know if that's a huge component. It might play a part. I think more of where the lake or where the reservoir falls in latitude, like we were talking about, because right now it's starting to warm up. We're having 70-degree days.
Not today.
Not in the cabin, outside.
You should have wore a coat, man.
Yeah, it's 70 outside, but it's 23 in the cabin.
But, I think that we just have that longer growing season. There's been some wildfires in the area. Some of the nutrients that are coming off the hill from those events probably help, for lack of a better term, fertilize the water, add to the productivity. So I think all of that kind of plays a part.
Where are some other places in Idaho that have kokanee, and why does Anderson Ranch kind of stand out from those other places?
Yeah, so Deadwood Reservoir, we already talked about Arrow Rock and Lucky Peak. Payette Lake has kokanee, Dorshak Dam, or Dorshak Reservoir, Lake Coeur d'Alene, Lake Pend Oreille.
So basically all the biggest lakes and reservoirs.
For the most part, those are kokanee fisheries in the state. And Anderson Ranch, I would say, typically has the largest fish out of those systems.
Due to what they're eating.
Essentially what they're eating, the length of the growing season.
Where it is in the state.
Yeah, just kind of all of the boxes are checked for good kokanee growth, and we have a decent or good natural production, or typically we have good natural production in the system. And so there's a fair number of fish out there, but it's not overpopulated like some places where we have stunted kokanee. It gets enough fishing effort that we can kind of control the abundance out in the lake as well.
Yeah. One of the biggest things we've been hitting on from an information standpoint this year has been addressing the concerns from anglers that want to know or want there to be a one size fits all kokanee playbook. Can you guys kind of talk to why that isn't necessarily a possibility?
Yeah, from a management standpoint, every water body is a little bit different, right? So right now in Anderson Ranch, we see these 11 to 13 inch kokanee in April. The last few years, those fish have been anywhere from 15 to 17 inches at this time of year. And so what that's telling us is that the abundance in the lake, it's either productivity is going down, which we have no reason to believe that's the case, or abundance is increasing, right? And so from that standpoint, what we're doing or what we do in Anderson Ranch, prime example, in Lucky Peak and Arrow Rock, because those are kind of hatchery dependent, those have 6 fish bag limits. When we changed the regulation a few years ago at Anderson Ranch from 25 to 15, that was kind of I don't want to say...
Is it reactive?
No, so I just completely lost the word.
Is it an acronym?
No, it is not an acronym.
It was more a social regulation change.
It was more of a social issue because nobody needs 25, 15 to 17 inch kokanee, right? Yeah. And so, but we also needed the ability to be able to control abundance a little bit because natural production is a big piece of Anderson Ranch. We needed a bag limit that still had some impact on the number of fish that would come up river and spawn each year. Because what we don't want to see is that with 4 or 5 good spawning year classes in a row, that abundance builds so much that we are left with 8-inch kokanee that don't recruit to angling gear. You don't even catch them because they're too small.
Right.
So,
and that's something we hear too is anglers want big fish, but they want a lot of big fish. And there's is it even possible to have that recipe?
We've been there before. I don't want to set ourselves up for being unsuccessful, but we've had 15 to 17 inch kokanee in July and bag limits of 25 fish per person. You know, there's a thought that we probably over harvested that year, and that's kind of how we got into the hole where we've been. But I would use caution with that and say that water management also plays a big part in Anderson Ranch. I think in years when we have really high flushing flows, like in 2017, we probably lost a lot of fish out of the system. And so that reduces abundance. You've also, you know, fished heavily on those adults that were in the system. And so there's less fish coming up the system to spawn. But we had two bad, like, flushing flow events. We had 2017 and 2019. And that led to some pretty low catch rates in 2020 and 2021, and we're just starting to build back out of that, kind of starting in 2022, 23, and 24. So,
does snowpack and like water levels in the spring, how big of a factor are those with those cycles?
So I think in Anderson Ranch, kind of the key is if we fill the reservoir, which is important for irrigation and water management through the whole system. If we fill the reservoir but don't, like, spill a bunch of water, if we're spilling for an extended period of time, we're going to lose fish out of the system.
And those from Anderson are moving down to Arrow Rock and Lucky Peak.
Or even flushing completely out of the system, down into the Snake where it's probably not suitable habitat and they don't survive.
Yeah.
And it's a long ways from Lucky Peak to Brownlee Reservoir.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, in terms of flow management, you know, when you get to the full pool, which is where you want to end up after the snowpack comes off, but you're not spilling a bunch of water out of the system, we retain those fish in the system. And we know we're always going to lose fish out of Anderson Ranch. That's part of the equation. But it's spillage. How much?
Yeah.
Or how many.
Gotcha. Do you feel like either of you know every single nook and cranny and corner of Anderson Ranch since you guys have grown up here?
Definitely not.
No.
I mean, stuff always surprises us.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time out here, but yeah, I don't think you ever completely know a fishery. But yeah, pretty familiar with it overall.
Yeah,
yeah, and you're constantly learning new things, right? So before 2017 and 2013 and 14, after the big wildfire that came through, we had some really big, like, mud flow events, and there was some thought that we lost production of, like, and this was in October after Kokanee had spawned and probably, you know, killed a bunch of eggs in the gravel, or there was some lost production in those couple year classes. But Kokanee also rebounded fairly quickly. And what we've seen as a result of 2017 is we've got new gravel throughout the whole system. So places where Kokanee didn't used to spawn, there's a lot of Kokanee spawning right now, or now, because of new gravel beds that have formed in the system.
So it's safe to say we're on the way back up from where we used to be, from 2017, 2019. What does that look like now from a management standpoint? So how do we, as an agency, seek to maintain or exceed? So what does this year look like for management? How do you manage the fishery? What does all of that look like?
So a lot of how we manage Kokanee in the system is controlling that abundance, because like Mike said, they're a density dependent species, so we don't want to get to the point where we have, you know, no Kokanee, because then it's awful fishing and nobody's happy. But we also don't want to have too many Kokanee where, again, they stunt and, you know, nobody wants to.
So you're looking for an equilibrium.
Exactly. So we do that by
It's the biggest word I'm going to use today.
Yeah. So most of the management for Kokanee in the system is just controlling that abundance and trying to keep that sweet spot. So, you know, again, do that through harvest regulations. So hopefully people are keeping some of those fish they're catching and keeping that abundance low enough. We're not, you know, over harvesting the fishery. But yeah, and it just centers around controlling that abundance to the point and meet our objectives for producing, the catch rates we want to see and that fish size that anglers want to see.
And there's a couple different things. Like, it's very hard to control abundance, right? Yeah. That's dependent on people understanding that there's kokanee out there, there's kokanee to be caught, and most people that are fishing for kokanee, because it's kind of, I don't want to say it's a technical fishery, because it's pretty simple after you've done it a time or two, but it takes some different gear than what most people. Yeah. You're not just pulling a spinner behind your boat for the most part. So angling is kind of a small piece of the control. Like, that is our only major control right now, but there are things that can be done. You could control escapement. Right, so we have a weir that was built in 2006 or 7 between where we're at now at Featherville and downstream in Pine. It's about a couple miles upriver from Pine. And that weir could be put in place if we thought that there were too many kokanee in the system spawning after a couple years, to where we could control how many fish went upstream to spawn.
So they hit that weir and they're like, well, now what?
But that's not the goal, right? No. So the goal is to produce these for anglers and to have that bag limit be high enough that the anglers can kind of help with that abundance level, and that we don't get back to where we have 8 or 9 inch kokanee.
A word that biologists like to use is levers. Would you consider that to be like a lever that fisheries managers could use to... Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That would be one of the very few levers that we have control of. Because the other thing is, you can kind of control that, and then we have a big water year, and we're back down because we've flushed a bunch of fish out of the system.
Gotcha.
So
one of the things, Mike, you mentioned a little bit ago was hatchery-dependent kokanee and hatchery-dependent kokanee fisheries. I want to maybe you can talk a little bit more about why that is applied in other fisheries across the state. I know we're talking about Anderson Ranch, but just for comparison's sake, like why are some other fisheries like Arrow Rock and Lucky Peak hatchery dependent when places like Anderson Ranch are not?
And so that was another lever that we have here at Anderson Ranch is we can stock hatchery kokanee to fill in some of those missing year classes. If we lose a bunch of fish out of the system through either spill, entrainment out of the system, or we have a loss of natural production because of a mudslide or some natural event upstream, then we can kind of pull that lever and put a few extra hatchery fish out in the system.
When we're stocking hatchery fish, what are they? Are they fingerlings? Are they full size? Are they?
They're typically 3 inch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anywhere from 1 to 3 inches long. They're fry.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So in Anderson, those are kind of our two levers, right? We can manually control escapement through angling or putting a weir in place. And when we have holes or missing year classes, we can fill that with stocking those fingerlings and letting those grow up in the system. And really, that's kind of hard. And I'm sure we're going to touch on some of the work that we do to kind of make sure that we don't have those holes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And some of that comes, plays a part in what Tucker will talk about. But those are really the only things that we can do, or the only parts of the recipe for us to control management on Anderson Ranch.
So let's move into that. Like, how do you? So we've got all that we can tell. Like, if we've had a high water year, how do you know how many fish are in there? Is it all surveys?
Yeah, pretty much. We survey the fishery in multiple different ways. So we look at the fishery itself. So a lot of the data we look at are, use a term here, but fishery dependent data. So going out and actually talking to anglers, using creel surveys.
Define that.
It's literally going out. Usually on Anderson, we're sitting at a boat ramp, one of the many boat ramps on the lake on a given day. But we sit out there when boats come in. We just interview anglers. We're looking.
You're not a conservation officer, so those people shouldn't be afraid to talk to you.
If you see us out there, talk to us, because we're there to talk to you about your fishing experience. We're asking questions like, how many hours did you fish that day? We're trying to get an idea of effort. We're counting anglers, just seeing how many people are actually out there. We'll ask to check out your fish that you've harvested, ask you how many you threw back and didn't harvest. We'll take lengths and weights from those fish just to get an idea of the ages of fish that are actually being harvested, things like that. So that gives us an idea of how the fishery is performing. So that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. So we have objectives that we want to hit. So we want to have a certain catch rate that our anglers have communicated that, hey, we want to catch this many fish per hour. So that's what we target, in addition to fish size. So, Anderson Ranch specifically, we want to see a catch rate of 0.3 fish per hour. So every 3 hours, you should be catching a fish, and that fish should be above 12 inches in length. So that's what we're shooting for.
What happens if you're an angler that doesn't catch a fish per hour?
Oh, that would be me.
That's where
when you tell them that stat and they're like, they show up with like one tiny little kokanee, do they?
That's
fish
where
for 8 hours.
That's an average. So a mean that we're looking at. We joke. 10% of the anglers catch 90% of the fish. Some people have 0 fish days, and that average is being brought up by those guys that are catching limits and just have it dialed in. So we look at an average, but on average, that's what we're shooting for. So that's how we gauge the fishery itself. Where the levers come into play is where we're surveying to forecast the fishery for the next year, trying to get a head start on what the fishery is going to look like the next year. So we use gill nets in that case in the fall. So we time those after the current spawners have left the reservoir. We go in the fall, we set our nets, and based on the amount of fish we catch and what their ages are, we can figure out what the fishery is going to look like the next year. We never know exactly how many fish are out there.
Impossible.
Exactly. Yep. We use what's called indexes. So, we caught more fish this year than last year, and we can kind of figure out what that abundance looks like. So these are, again, a density dependent species. Like this last year, we saw a huge increase in our gill net catch. And with that, we also saw the average length of fish we caught go down, which indicates to us that densities have increased pretty substantially.
That was last fall.
That was last fall.
Okay.
Those were pretty much when we age them, we collect otoliths. That's the other thing. When we're at the boat ramp talking to anglers, we might ask you, hey, do you mind if we cut some stuff out of your fish? We're taking ear bones so we can age these fish. Do the same thing when we're gill netting. Based on those ages from last year, most all those fish we caught last year were age 1 fish, meaning this fishery this year, they're going to be age 2s, which is generally when we see those fish susceptible to angling. Based on that data from last year, really strong year class, should be a lot of fish out there. And that's kind of how we get an idea of what's coming down the pipe. And we're always looking for opportunities to extend that outlook. So if we could figure out, how many age 0s are out there, so the ones that just washed into the reservoir, we could just know that much farther in advance whether or not we're going to have too many kokanee, too few kokanee, so we can pull those levers that Mike talked about by either stalking fish or controlling escape.
Is that possible to do? To see them coming in?
Yeah, so one of the things that, we're going to take a look at this year, one of our sampling methods is called trawling. And we can use a boat and pull a big fixed frame net that you pull at different depths in the water column, and you collect kokanee across all those depths. And this particular net that we're going to use starting this year is a fry net. And so we'll likely catch some zero.
You'll catch everything with that.
Well, but we'll probably catch age 0s and 1s. Trawling on larger fish is pretty hard, and that's kind of why that used to be a management technique that we used to try to forecast. And because we caught very few age 2s or 3s using trawling, we've kind of moved away from it to the gill nets that Tucker referenced. But
what's the difference between those two? Because I've heard of gill nets and I've heard of trawling, but are they the same thing?
So a gill net basically is put in place and sits there stationary overnight, or for a set amount of time. And trawling, you're actively pulling the net behind the boat at different levels. So like you might have it set at 20 feet for 3 minutes, then you drop it down or bring it up, for another 3 minutes, and then bring it up again for another 3 minutes. So you're stepping up through the water column or the kokanee layer that you see on the graph.
Okay.
And so you're trying to sample that whole layer to figure out what's in it. And this fry net that we're going to use for the first time at Anderson Ranch this late summer is we're hoping to catch age zeros, because we don't see many age zeros in the gill nets because they just haven't grown enough to kind of recruit to that gear. And so that'll give us that additional year out look. Like, we won't know for a few years of doing fry trawling whether or not this is a good tool for us. But if it is, we'll know based on the gill netting and fry trawling over the next few years that if we just do fry trawling, we'll know if we have any gaps in our year classes, and then we can either stock more fish or stock less fish.
Is this the first year you're doing that in Anderson? Has it been done before?
So prior to, I think, 2017, that's how we sampled pretty much all kokanee fisheries in the state, was using trawling. It wasn't this fry trawl. It was a bigger trawl meant to catch all year classes. But we used to trawl this every year during the summertime. But we've, again, gone away from that the past, 8 years. Going more for these gill nets to forecast the fishery. But yeah, we're trying to kind of reincorporate the trawling sampling method to, again, get the full picture of the fishery. Because, again, the gill nets sample mature size fish quite well. They don't sample the small fish. And the trawling is just the opposite. Samples small fish really well, does not sample those big fish. So by using both, we can get a full picture of the fish population out there.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, you asked, is this the first time it's been used? This is the first time it has been used at Anderson Ranch.
Okay.
When I was a fisheries research biologist on the Snake River Sockeye project, we used the fry trawl net on the Stanley Basin lakes to catch juvenile sockeye in the lake, and kind of develop that proportion between kokanee population in the lake and the natural production for the sockeye population. And so this is a technique that I thought might work for Anderson Ranch because it sampled age 0s and 1s fairly well in those basin lakes. And so we're going to give it a try.
And like Tucker said, you're in pursuit of painting getting a more clear picture of what's happening.
Yep.
With the gill netting, because I know this is something that we see in other fisheries across the state, is there a general understanding from anglers that this is one of the tools that our fisheries managers have to use to get a picture of the fishery? Or is there pushback from people because it is such a trophy fishery?
I think for the most part, people understand that's how we collect our data throughout the state. I chat with anglers all the time when we're out sampling at boat launches and whatnot. And they're always curious, asking what we're doing, but very rarely are people completely unaware that we use nets to sample fish. So people are pretty on board with that. Of course, when we get pushback, it's usually people seeing we do catch some large fish and sometimes quite a few of them. And we get pushback from folks just seeing that resource go to something other than a cooler, for sure. But for the most part, people are pretty supportive. They like to see us out there, and they're good about it.
Yeah, and those fish that are caught in the gill nets, that's biological data, right?
Yeah.
So we use every one of those fish either for age and growth information or length, weight information, relative abundance. So that's important data for managing the fisheries.
And probably a drop in the bucket.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We might catch 30 to 100 kokanee in a net. And, when you look at it from the viewpoint of an angler, that's, five. That's 5 limits. That's a full winter's worth of kokanee, smoked kokanee. So it looks like a lot, but when you consider that there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kokanee out there in a given year, it is truly a drop in the bucket.
And then I caught 0. I feel really good about that.
It's just not the same as it used to be.
It's never the same.
Have you started the surveys? When can people expect to see our staff out surveying?
Yeah, so our creel survey, we start that. We do 6 dates in midsummer, right in the peak of the fishing season. That goes randomly assigned 6 days between June 15th and July 15th. So half of those are weekend days, half are weekdays that we go out. Just if you're randomly out there on a weekend and see us, that's what we're doing. Our gill netting usually takes place either that last week of September, first week of October, and then we also do a quick spawning walk survey, looking for spawning fish in early September. So,
is it worth it to the angler to come up here in late fall, to be up here in late August, September, early October?
Absolutely. In my opinion, any day you can get out fishing is a good enough reason,
Right.
Just as long as the expectation to catch larger fish isn't there. Like I say, by late fall, those larger mature fish have moved out of the reservoir, but that up and coming year class is usually susceptible to angling gear, and you can catch fish. They're just going to be smaller on average.
Yeah, and that's all dependent on the number of fish in the reservoir and how fast they're growing, right? So sometimes in the fall, after the spawning year class has left the system, those fish are 11 to 12, 13 inches. Sometimes they're still 8 to 10 inches if there's a lot of fish in the system. And so it's kind of dependent on the angler whether or not it's worth their time to come out here in the fall. Certainly early spring, we start seeing, numbers of anglers uptick. Right now, I was here last Friday. There was maybe 10 or so boats total on the whole reservoir. This morning, there was probably that many boats in front of Curlew.
Yeah, so, it looked like it was lining up today.
Yeah. And this afternoon, there will be more.
Unless the wind gets turned on.
Or the sun.
Yeah.
What is a kokanee angler? I mean, that's...
Yeah, let's get into some generalizations here.
Yeah, stereotyping for me, please. No. What is a kokanee angler? Is it a special type of angler that goes after kokanee? Or do you see kokanee anglers being, like, in another way, like, are kokanee anglers just diehard kokanee anglers and that's all they do? Or is it kind of like the season's on, I'll give it a go, and they go hunt for other things?
I think you get both for sure. I mean, every species has its following. That's what you do. That's what you key in on. And we certainly see those guys that whenever I'm up here, I see their boat trailer at the boat launch. Like, these guys fish it every day, and certainly that aspect of the fishing community exists. But just within the department, the folks that get out and fish for kokanee, they're doing it seasonally. When the fishing's good, people come up and fish for kokanee and then move on to other endeavors as the season progresses. So it's a pretty good mix of, we talk to people at the boat launch that have never fished for kokanee in their lives and decided to give it a shot. A friend from work showed them a picture of a limited kokanee and they said, "Hey, I've got a boat, let's go do it." And so it's a spectrum, definitely spans a spectrum on.
What's the wildest example of like kokanee fervor or fandom that you've ever seen? Have you ever seen boats wrapped with kokanee themes or?
Haven't seen any wraps before, but some of the boats that come out,
Kokanee killer.
They have like crazy names on the back.
You can only fish 2 rods, but you'll see some folks come out and they've got what's probably, the value of my house in kokanee gear strapped to the side of it, and just a whole cabela's full of tackle boxes and everything. Some of the guys you can tell definitely this is their life, and that's what
Maybe it is their house.
it might be.
Those are the
Very
people
well
we
could
see on
be.
YouTube.
Yeah. Yep. What does some of that expensive gear look like? Is it not just 2 fishing poles slung over the side?
Oh, you can make it as expensive as you want it to be. Sometimes the guys got more electronics than they know what to do with on the boat to find them. They've got downriggers that are automatic that probably cost a couple $1,000 a piece.
Yep.
Rods everywhere. I mean, yeah, you can do it on a shoestring budget, or you can go crazy with it.
Yeah, when we were kind of researching for this podcast and looking at some examples of kokanee fishermen on YouTube, there was some fair share of redneck kokanee downriggers and setups.
We for sure saw the pre-retired folks that came out and had the downriggers and the boats, and they would spend a couple weeks at a time.
Yeah.
And then there was the one guy we watched that's like, I've got an afternoon, I'm taking my canoe out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to troll.
Yep.
One of the most common, like Tucker brings up electronics and how important some guys feel electronics are, right? One of the things I would say that people kind of rely too much on electronics. A lot of times kokanee are shallow. They're not always at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 feet down. This time of year, they're typically between the surface and 10 feet. And when you're driving a boat in crystal clear water over the top of a group of fish that are literally in the wake of your boat, you're not going to see them on your depth finder. And so a lot of times this time of year specifically, I'll get reports, hey, there's no fish in the lake. And we didn't catch anything and there's nothing out there. And it's literally, the fish are on the surface. You're not going to see them on your fish finder. And so that's where the shoestring budget, right? If you're going to target kokanee, right now is a really good time to target kokanee on a budget, because you just get out in your boat and you put your line out about 100 feet behind the boat and you just move through the water. And those fish are typically, near surface oriented. You can buy dodgers, which are what most people fish. A typical kokanee rig is what we call a rubber snubber to a dodger of some sort, and then about a 13 to 16 or 18 inch leader to some sort of kokanee attractor. Most of the time they're little plastic squid or something with a blade on it. You put a piece or two of shoepeg corn on that, put it out 100 feet behind the boat, and you
What
can
is
catch
shoepeg
kokanee.
Corn, Mike?
It is legitimately
You
a
say that
thing.
like we all know what you're talking about.
It is
I think it's a Jerome thing.
I don't think we grow that in the Magic
This
Valley.
is legitimately a thing with kokanee people. Like if
silage?
you use, it is not. There's actually what they call shoepeg corn in the grocery store, and if you use kokanee anglers are like adamant that you do not use any other type of corn. And I have to be honest, I've tried other kinds and we don't catch fish.
Okay.
We only catch it on shoepeg.
Are those just those little mini pickled corns that you get in like the condiment section?
It's literally Green Giant, a can of Green Giant, and it says shoepeg corn on it. And
It must be
you
a
can
Magic
buy-
Valley
No, this is statewide.
Okay.
Yeah.
The stock price.
think
This
we-
is a
Giant going
kokanee.
up.
This is a kokanee thing.
I'll go to Winco. You go to
they're gonna be out
Albertsons.
now.
Yeah, they're gonna
Limit one per customer.
It probably is not at Whole Foods.
No, probably not. No.
Probably not.
Do you think kokanee anglers shop at Whole Foods? Or is it,
Some of them probably.
Okay.
Yeah, with some of the money,
That's
yes,
true.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that demographic for sure.
And there's folks that make a living off of kokanee as well. There's one of our
Yeah, kokanee killer.
Kokobo Tackle. The guy that owns and operates Kokobo Tackle developed that tackle because of his passion and love for kokanee fishing. And that is probably one of the, most well-known types of kokanee gear that people use throughout the state.
Kokobo?
Kokobo Tackle.
Well, and you even think about towns, communities like Pine and Featherville, when the fish are not like in those down years, probably the whole community's suffer a little bit.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of, absolutely. There's a lot of recreation that occurs up here.
Sure.
But there are definitely people that pull their boats up and stay at the hotel in Pine. A lot of times because the whole shoreline could be, surrounded with boats and trailers.
Right.
So
Side by sides up
side by sides.
So many
Absolutely.
side-by-sides.
Man, Mike with some hot tips. Hot tips. That's a
I don't know if we can actually promote other businesses,
I was going to
but
say, you need a disclaimer saying
Yeah.
Mike is not sponsored by Green Giant or Kokobo
Yes.
Angling.
I am not.
giant.
But they're out there if you would like to use them.
Mike shops at Whole Foods.
Oh, you're one of those.
Real quick, I wrote this on the notes because I'm an idiot. But what is the difference between trolling and trawling?
So, yeah, we kind of explained trawling. So trawling is pulling a giant net behind your boat, actively going after the fish and catching them just, in a net. Trawling is...
From a management perspective, though. Not your recreation.
I mean,
Not recreational.
Not recreational.
And it's trawl with a W.
Yeah, trawl with the W.
Right.
And yeah, there's like ocean fisheries. A lot of those fisheries people are using some sort of trawl boat.
Okay.
It's how they catch all the haddock for your fish sandwiches and fish sticks and whatnot. Trolling is, like Mike described as well, pulling a piece of fishing tackle through the water and fish come to it and grab it instead of you actively capturing them in a net.
Which is where the corn comes in.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They couldn't have just picked any other word that didn't sound similar.
No,
Yeah, I don't know where those words originated from.
corn delivery system was not
Yeah, what was it?
roll off the tongue.
Pegfoot corn?
Shoe peg.
Shoepeg.
peg leg corn.
Yeah.
Shoe peg corn.
Peg leg cornies.
Peg leg cornies, yeah. Perfect. What are some other examples of tackle and,
Without using brand names.
Yep.
without using brand names?
So I don't remember if I went through and said the Dodgers were Kokobo or not, but like we can go back through and do that whole setup if you
The
want.
rubber blubbers, or what'd you call them?
The rubber snubbers, that's not a brand name.
Yeah.
Okay.
You should mention, like with this gear, the rubber snubber is really important because Kokanee, again, they're a filter feeder, so they don't have like a really strong jaw like
I've heard that from
rainbow trout
yeah.
or something that's out there eating live bait. So that rubber snubber basically softens that strike because you can rip the hook out of a kokanee's mouth really
Gotcha.
easy. So that rubber gives a little bit and lets you hook that fish more effectively.
Is that before the leader then?
Yeah, walk us down the line.
So starting at like a swivel at the end of your line coming off your rod.
Okay.
You typically attach a rubber snubber, and then below the rubber snubber is some sort of dodger. There's a lot of different, they're anywhere from 5 to 7, 8 inches long. Dodgers, there's a lot of different brands out there. And then below that, a leader that's anywhere from 13 to 16, 17 inches in length. Down to some sort of an attractor. Some guys will use flies that they tie. I use flies periodically, but you can also use what they call squids, little rubber squids. You can use a lure type with a blade on it, and then typically they tip the hooks below that with a piece or two of some sort of corn or some sort of another attractant. Typically you'll be moving through the water column. A fish will come up and hit. They're not always going to follow the boat. You're trolling anywhere from about 1.2 to 1.7 or 8 miles per hour. That's again where some of the electronics come into play because it tells you your speed. And when those fish hit, that rubber snubber will stretch enough to where, like, if they hit and turn off, you're not just pulling that hook through out of their mouth.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so that's the importance of the rubber snubber. You get that hit, typically you kick the boat out of gear and you reel in that fish and reset all your gear and do it again.
There was one guy we watched on YouTube that kept changing colors.
Yep.
What is that?
So you go through a pot of fish and you might catch a couple fish with, a similar color. Hot colors are typically at Anderson are typically oranges or pinks. Lots of colors work. I catch them on
Wonder Bread.
Wonder Bread is another popular one. What we call moon jelly is just a reflectant tape that we put on a Dodger. That sometimes is really a hot color. The coppers, depending on how late in the run you are. There's a lot of different pieces and parts to the nuances of tackle. And like you say, there's lots of YouTube videos. All of those are things that, when you become a kokanee angler, you just kind of keep in the back of your mind and you try. So you'll go through a pot of fish, you might catch a fish or two, and then it just kind of shuts off. So you change a color, you start catching fish again, and then it'll shut off. And then you change a color again. And so that's, we typically say if we are trolling for, 5 to 15 minutes and we're not getting a hit, try a different color.
Is that science or
try
superstition?
Probably more superstition. Because if the fish are there and they want to hit, they're going to hit.
It's an art. From a biologist.
Yeah. It's art. Who said biologists aren't artsy?
Yeah. He shops at Whole Foods too.
Yeah, he definitely does. Buying that moon jelly.
Yeah.
One of the things I was curious about is because, obviously you mentioned that kokanee or filter feeders are eating plankton, but what makes them go after bigger targets? I've seen people they put some either maggot or shrimp on the end of a hook. What triggers in them to go after all the smaller food, and then all of a suddenly attack a big chunker?
I think people have been asking that question since people started fishing for any kind of salmon, because it's the same thing with fishing for Chinook or steelhead. Once they enter the river, they shouldn't. They're not eating to sustain themselves. I think it's just I'm going to eat an instinct. Just like, hey, there's something there. Might as well take advantage of it.
Like toddlers.
Yeah,
just putting things in their mouth to see what it is.
These things are designed to eat, a salad, but a T-bone swims by. Hey, I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah,
just grab it out of whatever makes them do it. We're not sure.
Yeah, a lot of people say it's an instinctive movement, right? So whatever attractor, whatever you're using, is just to attract its attention, and then it, for whatever reason, does what it does.
Yeah, it flashes. It smells good.
Yeah, when you say Dodger, I'm thinking of like a flasher.
That's
exactly
another word for a
Okay.
flasher.
Okay.
Yeah, Chinook fishermen use flashers.
Okay.
Kokanee fishermen typically use Dodgers.
Okay.
They're a little smaller.
So there's terminology.
Yeah, it's like the difference between a bobber and a strike indicator. There is no.
Don't get me started.
Yeah.
Oh man, do Chinook anglers call it trawling then?
Maybe in the South.
Well, when you're in a boat pulling plugs, you're technically trawling.
No, you're trolling, not trawling.
Trawling.
See, I tricked you, Mike.
Yes, you did. Trolling. TROLL.
That's right.
ING.
What else you guys got on kokanee fishing? Is there anything that we haven't asked you yet, or?
I guess one of the things, a lot of times we get asked why we don't close the fishery down in the river when the fish are easily seen. People are fishing for them. A lot of guys will fish with egg patterns for kokanee that are in areas where they're going to spawn or where they are spawning. And again, that's probably more of one of those fishery, there's no biological harm for people to fish at that time of the year, so that's not a big...
But it's a social perception thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is fishing opportunity. If you don't have a boat, you can see them in the river. You can fish for them at that time of the year. I believe once they leave the river, the bag limit per day is 6 fish. In what would be the South Fork of the Boise. So it's no longer a 15-fish limit once they leave the reservoir. So that's another control mechanism for people that might want to harvest the fish at that time.
Yeah.
Typically, you see the further along they are in the spawning process, probably the softer the flesh quality is. They start to break down just physically as they get close to spawning time frame. So a lot of people are just catch and release fishing.
And they turn it a completely different color.
Absolutely.
Like we go from silver to red, which
Bright red.
I was fascinated by.
Yep.
Absolutely fascinated by that.
They get the big old hook jaw and all that.
Yep.
the males do. Yeah.
Their whole body.
What's the point of that?
Probably just trying to attract a mate. Like the males are the ones that have the biggest shift. The females still turn red, but they don't get that big hump on their back like the males do. Mm-hmm. It's a dominance, I think, attractant thing.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up that they're swimming up the South Fork here, and I never even thought about fly fishing for them, but is there kind of a season or a general time when that's the social perception thing is off, like that they're not actively spawning, but they're still using the South Fork and flushing up or down? Yeah,
they're certainly in the system anywhere from early August till the second, third week of September. And there's different places and points that you can see those fish along the river. And there's a fair number of people that come up here at that time of year just because they don't have boats and they can't get out on the reservoir. Mm-hmm. And so there are people that fish for kokanee at that time of year.
I would have never thought of that.
Yeah, it can be pretty fun actually.
Yeah.
We've done it the past couple of years just while we've been up here, and it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
You got to
catch them on the fly, or
yes. They're pretty tight-lipped, but you can have some pretty great days. I mean, and the last couple of years, those have been 18 to 20 inch fish, which that's pretty fun on a fly rod or a spinning rod.
And I'm guessing they're taking them down in the water column, not taking dry flies.
Correct.
Off the surface.
Yeah.
Yep.
What are they? But I mean, so like with salmon, right? Like when salmon are at that point in their spawning career, they're not actively they're not feeding a whole lot, right? So do kokanee kind of possess that same behavior?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're just trying to elicit a strike. It's not they're not feeding, but you're just trying to put it in front of them and just make that snap decision and grab your fly or your spinner or something. So
they could be very frustrating at times too, because you can see a fish that you're trying to target.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And you cast to that fish 50 times and it never opens its mouth. You never get a strike. You change colors. Mm-hmm. You do it another 50 casts, still nothing.
That's Mike's experience. The rest of us don't have that much trouble. But.
Yeah, it actually sounds really familiar.
Yeah.
So we're going to go fishing with Tucker after this. That's really cool, man. Another thing I want to ask, because you brought up things that we've heard from anglers, but what are some other things that anglers say about the Anderson Ranch kokanee fishery, that things you like either want to dispel or just common concerns that anglers have about this fishery in particular?
One thing with this fishery is, so we supplement the fishery some years with hatchery origin kokanee. In certain years, I should start by saying what we have in Anderson Ranch that spawns naturally are what we call early run kokanee. That means, like I say, we talk about the time frame. They're spawning and doing that spawning run in very early fall, late summer, that August, September time frame. Certain years we can't meet the stocking request with early kokanee just because how we source the eggs and things just don't always work out. And in the past we've had to stock late run kokanee.
I see.
Essentially the same life cycle, everything, but they would make that spawning run in later October. So why I bring that up is a lot of anglers have complained about the flesh quality differences between those two strains of kokanee. Early run kokanee generally much more vivid, bright red flesh color, whereas late kokanee might not have that bright, vivid color. It's still pretty pink, but we get some complaints about the color. Say the flavor isn't quite there with the late run kokanee. Personally, having sampled both, I can't tell the difference, but there are some folks that certainly perceive a difference between the two, and that's something we have heard from anglers. It's our preference to stock early run kokanee, but like I said, we do have to stock those lates from time to time, and it's something that comes up. And Mike definitely fields a lot of those calls. He's in the office a little more, but
Yeah.
And we do have a news release that kind of goes into a lot more detail. It's a few years old, but it is still on our website. And, you know, for people that are curious about that, we have one of the biggest fears for I think some of our avid kokanee anglers is they don't want that late run to establish, and I think we've kind of avoided that up to this point, and we'll see. You know, we for the foreseeable future, I'm not sure we're going to stock kokanee into. We will this year because they're already coming here, but it's at a much more reduced number from what we've stocked in the past, because we also think that, you know, we've got a good year class out there. There's plenty of opportunity, and we think that next year's year class is going to be very similar. And so one of the things that probably helps us from establishing that late run is the fact that when those fish are spawning, they're what we call shoal spawners. So they spawn around the shoreline of the reservoir. And as, let's say they spawn mid to late October, they're still pulling water out of Anderson Ranch after those fish have spawned. And so a lot of those reds are probably dewatered. And so we don't have that recruitment coming back into Anderson Ranch.
Gotcha.
And so these late spawning fish are more just to fill that potential hole in those years that we've had a lack of late or early kokanee from the hatcheries, and where we've had some like decreased abundance in the reservoir because of, you know, flow, high snow runoff events, or some sort of other, you know, limiting factor that we have to adjust that dial for management.
Yeah. Well, and based on a lot of the other fisheries you mentioned, I mean, Dworshak, Arrow Rock, a lot of these are all reservoirs, so drawdown is a factor.
Yep.
I'm trying to, I mean, I guess Pend Oreille would be a natural one.
It is natural, but there are lake level effects, or there were thoughts originally that there were lake level effects because they do draw it down and raise it up a little bit. There is a dam control structure on the downriver or downhill side of Lake Pend Oreille. Okay. So it'll fluctuate a little bit.
Is the water the biggest? I don't know another word. Enemy.
I don't know that it is.
It sounds funny, but like you were talking about the spillover and the drawdown, and like it matters. The water matters.
I think it's just the extremes that really affect this fishery. Like you say, Mike said 2017 and 2019, those were huge water years. It wasn't just like above average.
Based on tons of snow in the mountains.
Tons of snow, all of it coming off at once and just creating these huge flow events. And those are the ones that I think negatively affect the fishery. You know, having a good snow year and good flow at the reservoir, that's not what limits us. It's those extremes that hurt fisheries.
And I don't think that it's like a flow management issue, right? So it is just those high extremes, like Tucker mentioned.
So if an angler wants to pay attention to something like that, they could and say, well, we've had a really high, if the water's really high, if we've had a really good snow year, or extreme snow year, maybe things will be bad next year.
Yeah. So when we're talking about flushing fish out of the reservoir, it's not our adult fish that we're losing. It's that year class, those small ones that can't fight that current, you know. And you use age zeros in your fisheries, usually age 3 fish. You're not going to see the problem for a couple of years, but year 3, that's when you aren't catching those larger fish. Right. So it's something that's the problem's coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in a prime example, right? So, 2020 was probably the lowest point of
a lot of our lives.
For a lot of different reasons. It was also one of the lowest points in terms of catch rates and harvest for Kokanee and Anderson Ranch over a long time frame, right? And so that was the culmination of 2017. We lost a lot of fish out of the system, and we also had a really high harvest year, and so multiple factors probably led to that hole in the fishery. So there weren't many adults in 2020 that came upstream to spawn, but there were enough of them because in 2023, 2022, 2023, we started to build back up out of the hole and develop a fishery again. We saw a little bit of a blip after the 2019. We lost some fish, but probably not near as significant as it was in 2017. And so it's taken us a little bit of time, to get out of that hole. But where we're at now is probably very similar to where we were at in 2015, 2016. And that's building back up to where, depending on growth rates and productivity of the reservoir and how things kind of stack up in terms of water in the system, we could have those really high catch rates with bigger fish again. Right now we're kind of trending like there's too many fish and we're not going to get up to those 15, 16 inches. And so the forecast is get out there and fish and harvest.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
That is easily the hardest thing that we try and stress with people when we're trying to explain these processes is it's a long time frame.
Right.
So we mentioned the fantastic fishing in 2017. You think about it, 3 years prior to that, we had wildfires in the system, all those mud flows that washed a ton of nutrients into the reservoir, just ramped up productivity. So we had a lot of fish and a lot of big fish. So, when you see great fishing, it's not what happened that year or the year before. You have to think what happened a few years prior in these systems.
Right.
So anglers need to be patient, and they also need to be mindful of those factors and changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you also have to kind of keep in mind that that event changed the system, but it also changed the system for good, right? That high flow event produced all this new gravel that could be the result of where we're at today, because the spawning conditions up here are phenomenal compared to where they were probably prior to that event. And these are also aging systems, right? So Anderson Ranch has been here for a long period of time, and without that wildfire event, we had that flush of nutrients into the system, but through time, that's going to slowly taper off. And so we might see a drop in productivity at some point. Those are things that are really, really hard to measure. Yeah. But we can kind of measure it using some of our fisheries growth type monitoring that we do. And we can keep a pulse on this ability to forecast and to give anglers an idea of what fishing's going to be like on Anderson Ranch.
That's what I'm taking away from today, is learning about the spawning, just how much it matters. Yeah. The other things, like the things we can't control, are the things that matter in some cases the most.
Yeah. Anderson Ranch is one of the few places that natural production is probably more important than the hatchery stocking that we use. And because of that, there's a lot less management dials that we can tweak and play with.
Yeah. Say Kokanee are they're all or nothing, They're not like resident rainbow trout that might spawn a couple times in their lifetime. Kokanee, they live, they grow to a certain size, they spawn, and they die. And when you put all your eggs in one basket, and it just makes them very susceptible to these little environmental changes that could, wipe out a year or two of fish. And they're just notoriously flashy and hard to manage for that reason. So.
Yep.
What are some of your favorite nicknames that you've heard over the years for big Kokanee?
I'd always call them Kokanee. growing up and everything. Then I moved to North Idaho to go to school, met my wife, and started fishing on Dvorak for blueback. They said, we're going bluebacking. I had no idea what the hell they were talking about.
What you're getting into.
Yeah, and we went out there.
You're like, grab your shoehorn corn. We're going bluebacking.
Exactly.
Like, what the hell are we doing?
So, yeah, once I learned that term, I've always been partial to the term blueback.
Yeah. So one of the terms that you hear for like crappie are slabs, right? If you get a hand-sized crappie, that's a slab. Well, at Anderson Ranch, we get slab kokanee. And it's just something that I've heard from anglers. Like, there were a bunch of slabs out there last year. And those are those 18 to 20-inch kokanee. When you fillet that fish, you're putting some meat into the freezer.
Yeah.
So
slabs.
Slabs.
Okay. Do they tack on kokanee at the end of it? Or is it always just slabs?
It's always slabs.
Okay.
When they give me a call and we're talking on the phone, it's there were slabs or there were no slabs.
Yeah.
Slabs or no slabs?
Yeah.
That is the question.
I don't know how we can work that into our regular conversations.
I'm going to start using slab everywhere I go.
Okay.
Well, I mean, do you guys want to play rapid fire real quick?
Sure.
I think we'll just alternate between the two of you guys. So the way this works, it's pretty easy, but don't spend too much time on an answer. It's going to be, don't look at the questions at either. We're going to just rapid fire pelt you with some of these questions.
Okay.
All right.
Let's go.
Who wants to go first?
Tucker,
fly rod or spin rod?
Usually fly rod, but if I want to put away some meat for the freezer, spin rod.
Okay. Mike, only fish for kokanee for a week, a year, or only fish for rainbow trout the entire year? You can only do one.
kokanee.
Really?
Yep. Right. I'll fill the freezer full of kokanee. They're good to eat.
Fried fish or grilled fish, Tucker?
Fried fish, of course.
Okay.
No question.
Mike, would you rather be mauled by a grizzly bear or shish kebab by an elk antler?
Ooh. Man, I think an elk antler. Just one puncture versus hundreds?
Several?
Having your face ripped off?
Yeah.
What was the first animal you guys harvested?
Rough grouse, actually. First thing I ever shot.
Probably a Tweety bird with my pellet gun.
Yep, in there. Worst thing you ever smelled, both of you guys ever smelled on the job?
This is going to be
Not
the
each
same.
It's going to be the same answer.
Don't say each other.
That is about a 3-week dead white sturgeon on the Snake River a couple years ago during the quagga mussel treatments. I've never smelled a dead human body, but I imagine that's about as close as I'm going to get.
How big was it?
About 6 foot.
Yep.
Is that your answer too, Mike?
Absolutely. Same
gosh.
thing. We talked about that one yesterday.
Ooh, man. That was
A dead
It was
dinosaur.
horrible.
Dead dinosaur. You have 1 week to hunt any game animal in Idaho. Which animal and why?
elk
Elk?
with a bow.
Ooh. No question. What about you, Mike?
Bighorn sheep.
Okay.
For sure.
Which is the better big game animal? White-tailed deer or mule deer?
Mule deer. No contest.
My passion is mule deer, so definitely mule deer, but I'd much rather eat a whitetail.
Okay. Aside from a sturgeon, what's the biggest fish you ever caught in Idaho? And where was it? You don't have to say where it was.
43 and a half inch steelhead on the Clearwater.
Holy smokes.
Probably about a 30-pound common carp on the Snake River.
You shoot with a bow?
No, caught a fly rod.
Nice.
I take that back. I forgot the lake trout on Stanley Lake, 44 and a half.
Yeah,
You
okay,
already,
yeah.
you already threw that one out there.
You just wanted to brag about that again.
You just wanted to
You want to say it one more time?
44 and a half lake trout.
Didn't even gill net it.
Nope.
You're leaving to go on a hunting and fishing trip and pack your cooler. What kind of sandwich and what kind of drink are you bringing?
PB&J and a Coors Banquet.
Oh, nice.
Tuna fish and buffalo trace.
Ooh.
Oh,
Nice.
Yeah.
The tuna fish. No. Okay, so this is one we thought of this past weekend. At 30 yards, would you rather get shot by a 12-gauge dove shot or a compound bow expandable broadhead?
Buckshot, or the
dove shot?
Buckshot.
You're upgrading it.
Yeah, dove shot's too easy. All right, last one. If you had to guess, how many dispersed camping site fire rings are there in Idaho?
Dispersed meaning not in the campground.
Correct.
Man, do you know the
22,000.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Is there a way
No
to?
idea.
That'd be honest.
I thought you guys had some weird fact.
It's our own creel survey.
I'd say 15,000.
Yeah, I said 22,000. I think it's a little high, but
That's a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
thousands are a lot.
Yeah.
Boom. The last thing we forgot to ask you guys is, what's your favorite way to prepare kokanee?
So I've got two. Smoked kokanee wins every time. It's just delicious. But I did try cold smoked kokanee, so cured and not cooked, but cold smoked, like lox, and had that on a bagel.
Ooh.
That is hard to beat.
You still get the flavor
With some
of
cream
the
cheese.
smoke, but
Yep. You do it right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
interesting.
For me, when I catch kokanee, I'll keep 2 or 3 to eat fresh, and the rest get smoked. But the go-to fresh recipe is simply bacon salt and lemon pepper and butter.
Really? Okay.
Yep, just grilled.
Grilled. Okay.
Amazing.
Well, very good, you guys. Jeez.
The silence is like, oh.
Well,
Must be
yeah,
lunchtime.
we're still stuck in this cold, dry cabin with no food to eat. I think it's gone up. I think it's gone up 1 degree since we've been sitting and recording.
I haven't heard your teeth chatter too bad.
No, it's okay. But well, holy smokes, Tucker and Mike, thanks you guys so much for meeting us halfway from Boise and coming up to talk about kokanee and Anderson ARR.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's,
we covered a lot of ground today.
It's been a pleasure.
yeah, definitely. I appreciate the ability to come and talk about it.
Well, best of luck fishing later this spring and this summer. And
Definitely.
if we don't see you guys this fall, good luck hunting too.
Same to you.
Same to you.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Adios.